Hello beautiful people, welcome to Remy's Fashion. My name is Remy. Thank you all for subscribing and supporting my channel. I do not take it for granted. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to cut and sew exaggerated puffy sleeves. Let's get started. So the materials you will need are, I'm going to be using my sleeve pattern. This is a shorter version of the sleeve pattern I have on this channel. I will be using my sleeve pattern to make this sleeve. If you have not seen the video on how to draft a basic sleeve pattern, I'll put the link in the description box below and on the cards above. This is a shorter version of that pattern. You can decide to make your sleeve pattern longer or shorter, depending on the kind of sleeve you want to draft. I'll be using my markers to be able to draft this pattern. You should use a pencil when drafting pattern. I have my rulers here, my measuring tape. I'm going to be using this fabric, popularly known as Ankara, to cut my puffy sleeve. I'm going to be using a lining for it as well. I'm going to be using stay for my lining, and this is a gum stay which I'm going to be using for the sleeve. It helps it to stand. And then I have an extra pattern paper which I'm going to be drafting this puffy sleeve. This is another drafting paper, so I folded it into two, and then I place my sleeve pattern on it. To make the gathers, I'm going to add an extra 10 inches on the width of my sleeves, and I'm going to measure 10 inches from the folded part of my pattern paper. 10 inches will put me here, and then I'm going to rule a line. Rule a line all the way down like this. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to trace the shape of my sleeve. So after tracing out, this is what I have. The next thing I'm going to do now is to cut out this sleeve. So I'll take out this. This is our new shape. So this is our new sleeve pattern. When I open it up, this is what we have. So I'll open it up like this, and then I'll trace out the front part. This is the front sleeve, and then this is the back. So you see, when we put this to this matches. So I want this side to match as well, the front side. So I'm going to place it like this, and then I will cut out. After tracing out the front, I'm going to cut out the front part. So I've cut out the front part. So I'm just going to indicate this is my front side. I'll put F there, and then this is my back. I'll put B there. You remember that part where I went up by half an inch to create the front and back sleeve curve? So I'm going to notch there on my own pattern. This for the front, I'm going to put a mark there. I'm going to notch it. This for the back, and I'm going to notch that as well. So I have my puffy sleeve pattern. So this is the front side, and then when I match the back one, this is the back side. The reason why I notched to indicate is because we will have to gather the sleeves to create the puffy look, and our gathers will be starting from here and ending on there. We do not want to exceed that. So if I'm going to be sewing from here, I'm going to start from this notch, and I'm going to end at this notch. The next thing I'm going to do now is to cut out my sleeve pattern on my fabric and lining. When I drafted my sleeve pattern, I added allowances to the side and to the bottom, but I did not add any allowance at the top. So I'm just going to add half an inch sewing allowance at the top, and then I will cut out. So now I'm going to cut out. So this is my sleeve pattern. Don't forget to transfer your notches. So I'm going to transfer my notches from my sleeve pattern to my fabric. So I will mark and I will notch. I'll notch the back one as well. You can add 2 notches at the back so you know where your back is. So I'm just going to mark. I'll just use my tailor's chalk to indicate so I know this is my back. Once I take off my pattern, this is my wrong side. Because my fabric, the front and the back looks almost the same, I'm just going to make this mark. This is going to indicate to tell me that this is the wrong side of my fabric. This is my right side. So this is the sleeve on my fabric. I'm going to cut the same thing with my lining. With the length of my lining is going to be 1 inch shorter than that of my fabric. The reason why I'm doing that is because I do not want my lining to show at the bottom. So I'm going to pull it up. This is my fabric placed on top of my lining. I'm going to cut out exactly the same. The only difference is that my lining is going to be 1 inch shorter than my main fabric. This is because I do not want it to show on the hem. So I'm going to pull it up. You will see when we get there. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to cut out my lining. And then my lining, like I said, is going to be 1 inch shorter than my fabric. Okay, so I've cut out my fabric. I've cut out my lining as well. As you can see, my lining is 1 inch shorter than my fabric. So I'm going to cut out this interfacing, and this is called gum stay. And I'm going to cut out the same length and width for my main fabric. And then the lining, I'm going to be using air stay. This is because the lining is really light. I want to give it a bit of weight. So I'm going to iron this onto here, and then the gum stay on the main fabric. So I've cut out my interfacing for both my lining and fabric. Just like I said earlier, I cut out air stay for my lining and then gum stay for my fabric. The gum stay is going to help the sleeve stand firm. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to iron. I'll iron on my interfacing so that the glue will melt and stick to the fabric. You're ironing your gum stay to the wrong side of your fabric. And the glue on the interfacing, it's facing the wrong side of your fabric. Ironing on my interfacing to both my lining and my fabric. This is what I have. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to run a loose stitch on both my lining and fabric. So I'll start from this end and I'll end here where we have our notches. So from this part to this part. So that's the next thing we're going to do now. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a loose stitch on both my lining and fabric. So I'm going to turn my machine to my gather stitch. So do the same thing with yours, and then I'm going to sew. So I'm going to start from where I notch from this end to the other end. I will leave a long thread tail at the beginning and at the end of my stitch. I will start from where I notch. Usually I will say back stitch at the beginning and at the end every time you do a stitch, but not for this one. Do not lock your stitches anytime you're creating gathers. When I get to the end, I will leave a long thread tail. This will help me to pull my gathers easily. So I'll do the same thing for my fabric before I pull the gathers. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the gathers. So pull gently so that you don't cut your thread. See the way I'm pulling gently? I'm forming the gathers. And then make sure you measure your circumference to know what fullness, how much gathers you should pull. I've gotten mine up to what I need. So the next thing I'm going to do is I will tie my stitches, tie them so that I will not lose. So you just tie both sides. So I'll do the same thing. I'll pull the gathers for the fabric. So pull gently so so that you don't cut your thread. You've gotten up to your required circumference. So I have my required circumference. I'm going to tie them, tie my strings so that they don't loose. See how puffy my sleeve is? Then I'll join the right side of the fabric to the right side of the lining. So now I'm going to join the right side of the fabric to the right side of the lining. Locking in my stitches. So I lock in my stitches at the end. After sewing the bottom, this is what it looks like. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to join the sides together. So I left 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to join the sides together. So that's fabric to fabric and then the lining to the lining like this. So I'm going to stitch across. I left 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's the provision I made. So that's what I'm going to use. So whatever sewing allowance you left, that's what you should use to sew. So I'm sewing my fabric to my fabric and then the lining to the lining. So after sewing, this is what I have. So I've serged the edges, that's the sides, just to give it a neat finish. And then I've serged the joining where I joined the lining to the fabric. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it to the right side. So remember when we cut the fabric, we cut the lining 1 inch shorter. So I'm going to make sure I have that 1 inch on the inside like this. And this is our puffy exaggerated sleeve. So now I'm going to go ahead and then I'm going to iron and making sure my 1 inch is on the inside. So this is our exaggerated sleeve. See how it's standing? This is the inside. Remember I cut the lining short by 1 inch. So this is it. See the inside? I cut it short by 1 inch and I move it upwards. So this is our puffy sleeves. This is what our puffy sleeve looks like. Isn't it beautiful? You can now attach this sleeve to any top or dress of your choice. Do yours? Tag me on Instagram at Remy's Fashion. I would love to see it. Hope this tutorial was helpful. Please give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions or suggestions, I'll be in the comment section below. See you in my next tutorial. Take care and God bless.